afternoon, folks. Well, good afternoon to those on this end of the earth. So myself and the Pretty Agile team are coming to you from Melbourne, Australia, and this is actually technically the SAFe Australia Online Meetup. But it doesn't take me too long to look around this room to recognise some Kiwis and a few Kiwis actually, and a token Texan, at least I've spotted so far. So thank you everyone for joining. We are really thrilled to have Andy Sales, or Andrew as he is formerly known, back with us today. He was last here at this meetup, I don't know, maybe 18 months, getting close to 2 years ago, probably when all any of us did was sit online talking to each other. Andy and I were just chatting while we were waiting to kick off about this still being online, and it's so interesting, right? We're about to top 80 people on this call. We never got 80 people in an in-person meetup in Melbourne. That never happened in all the years we ran in-person meetups. And of course, I don't think Andy would have had time to drop by. Could you have flown via Melbourne on your way to Nashville, Andy? Probably would have been a bit inconvenient, I'm guessing.
Sounds very efficient.
All right. Anyway, so Andy has, I don't know, we're trying to do a little bit of time tracking. I've known Andy since before he was at Scaled Agile. What were you saying, that six years at Scaled Agile, Andy?
Yeah, about 6 years there. And I think you and I met when I was at Raleigh before I joined Scaled Agile.
So we've known each other for some time. Andy's been with Scaled Agile for 6 years. He was doing SAFe before that, and a bit earlier this year, I think it was, he was appointed as the chief methodologist. Very fancy title, Andy. Maybe that's why we got so many people turned up. You've got such a fancy title now.
Yeah, my kids keep asking me what it means, and still trying to explain it to them.
Okay. We won't ask them. We'll just go, it's very fancy, and we're all suitably impressed. So Andy's going to talk to us today about coaching flow. Some of you might have caught a little bit earlier. He was mentioning this is new content. So new, fresh content, a little bit of experimentation on the Australians, as the Brits do like to do. So I think this is part of the course, I think. Andy, if you're good, I'm going to hand it over to you. Folks, drop your questions in the chat as we go, and Andy will run through his deck, and then we'll have a good, I don't know, 20 minutes or so for questions at the end of the session.
Fantastic. Can you see the slide, Em?
Yes, I can, which I'm hoping means everyone else can. I saw some thumbs up. I think we're good.
Great. Okay, well, let me kick things off just firstly by saying thanks again to Em and Adrian for inviting me to speak here. I think it has almost been 2 years. It's always a pleasure to get on this meetup and share some of the new ideas and IP that we have. And today I want to talk about coaching flow. As you all know, a few months ago now, on March 15th, we launched the latest version of SAFe 6.0. And although there were 6 themes that described all the things that were new about that release, the overarching theme was really flow. And there was a huge focus on how we measure flow, how we accelerate flow, how we really implement flow at every single level of the framework, from teams moving stories through iterations, or whether it's the SAFe portfolio moving new business cases through the portfolio Kanban system. One of the things that you'll see as I go through this talk is that new release also put an emphasis on multiple roles in the framework in really helping the organization understand how to implement flow. So we have some new IP coming together. It'll be a new extended guidance article called Coaching Flow. You'll see it drop next week, either during or before or slightly after the SAFe Summit. And it's really going to help us help those who need to now adopt a flow mindset in their role and help them understand the work they need to do to help the organization affect flow and accelerate flow. When I go through this, you'll also see that we have a brand new set of responsibilities that fall under coaching flow, but really at their heart, they can be applied and picked up by anyone who has the responsibility to help implement a flow-based system. Em already did the introductions, but I'll just briefly say a few more things. At Scaled Agile, of course, in the role of chief methodologist, one thing I'm always doing is working with partners and SAFe enterprises to really understand how we need to continue to evolve the framework. So what are the big challenges they're facing? Where do they need new guidance? Where is the current guidance supporting them or not supporting them? So although we did the big release on March 15th, that certainly doesn't end the evolution that we're doing. We're continually evolving the framework, and we've got lots more exciting things to come later this year. So let me get started into the content. And if you think about the latest evolution of the framework, one of the things we did was change how we think about the lean agile mindset. The lean agile mindset really forms the foundation of this new way of working. Agile, of course, is described by the Agile Manifesto. We see the teams working in an iterative manner, adopting agile methodologies, but we also see lean being applied across the agile release trains, across the portfolio, as we start to apply lean to our product development processes. And one of the big changes we made in 6.0 was to remove the House of Lean as our best method of describing what we mean by lean, and bringing in the 5 lean thinking principles that you can see on the slide here. We didn't lose all the goodness associated with the House of Lean. That's been picked up by other things like the core values. But these 5 lean thinking principles I found to be hugely effective in explaining the journey that organizations are on as they adopt SAFe. Number one, it starts with helping organizations identify their products. That's at the beginning of any product-based approach. And then, of course, step 2, identify the value streams, the people, the systems, the work needed to actually deliver value through those products. And so now we have value stream thinking built into the foundation of SAFe. And of course, once we have our value streams identified, then we can apply the good lean principle to make value flow without interruptions, which will be the focus, of course, of the talk today. To finish out the last 2 principles, we don't want to delay in delivering value to our customers. And of course, pursuing perfection is an important lean tenet. We talk about continuous improvement in SAFe all over the framework. So we have this focus in terms of organizing around value. We have this focus in terms of accelerating and making the value flow without interruptions. And I've just put a little definition at the top of this slide about how we really think about flow within SAFe. We want this nice, smooth, linear, and fast movement of work product through all the steps in the value stream. And you'll see as I go through the talk and the slides, we can think about value streams and workflows at any level. We'll certainly think about them in terms of the work the teams do, the Agile release train, or even work moving through the portfolio. And we see other thought leaders, particularly the DevOps community, folks like Gene Kim. You can see the quote on the slide here, also recognizing that flow and a smooth flow of work is critical, not only to shorten lead times, but also to improve predictability. There was a recent survey I saw of senior leaders and executives asking them what was the most important thing for them as they move their business forward into the digital age. And predictability was the #1 thing they wanted to see. They truly believed that if they could be predictable as a business, it meant they could make and meet commitments to their customers, to their stakeholders. They could really start to plan what their strategy would look like and successfully execute on that. And flow is at the heart of what it means to be not only fast, but also predictable when we take new ideas and products to market. So a little bit of history here. We started on the work to research flow about 2 years ago, perhaps about 2.5 now. And we went back to the roots. We went back to lean thinking. We looked at the lean thinking principles that you just saw described by Womack and Jones. We went back to Goldratt. We spoke to enterprises who were struggling to accelerate flow. We spoke to enterprises who were doing it very successfully. And one of the breakthrough moments that we felt we had was what you see on the slide here. We started to recognize that wherever flow was taking place, whether it was teams, again, moving stories through the iteration, whether it was the art delivering features through the continuous delivery pipeline, whether it was the portfolio shepherding through new business cases, there were always 8 properties that really governed whether flow was working effectively. And you can see these on the slide here. And many of these will be familiar to you, things like work in process. Any flow-based system has some work in process. Too much, there's a challenge. Too little, we're starving the system. We need to balance that work in process. There'll always be a biggest bottleneck, number 2, that we need to address. We'll talk about how we do that later. Any flow-based system has handoffs, either from one person to another, or perhaps from one team to another. And there's always some kind of feedback. It may be technical feedback in terms of how we're developing the product. It could be customer feedback as to whether we're developing the right product. Batch size, we've talked about that in SAFe for many years now, governs flow deeply. Batches get too large, they get stuck in the system. And of course, things like queues, too much work building up makes it very hard to be responsive. Importantly, we mustn't forget that there's workers in the system doing the work and also policies that govern that work. And we'll come back to this later in the slides. But once we really understood these properties, it helped us to unlock the accelerators that we could apply to each property to really think about how we could improve flow. For us, that was a real breakthrough moment. Now, one thing that no one will have seen before is what you see on the slide here. This is our brand new coaching flow responsibility wheel. One of the things that I hope you've seen in the new update to SAFe 6.0 is what we're calling responsibility wheels. We have them for every single role in the big picture, and they are the 4, 5, or 6 key responsibility areas that that role really needs to embody in order to be successful. And that's helped us move away from what was previously a long list of responsibilities, sometimes very hard to pass. Now, for any role that an organization is helping to support their development, be it Scrum Master, RTE, Product Manager, you can quickly see at a glance the 4 or 5 areas that that role needs to think about to be successful. Now, when you look across all the roles in the big picture, you'll see at least 4, 5, maybe even 6 that have flow as one of their responsibility areas. Things like Scrum Master, Team Coach, RTE, STE, all of them have some aspect of flow. Even the teams and the arts have a focus on delivering value, which presupposes that flow is taking place. One role in particular, though, the SPC, the Safe Practice Consultant, really plays a larger role here than anyone else. And one of their direct responsibility areas is coaching flow. So for all those roles that have some kind of responsibility, this new coaching flow responsibility wheel is helping them to understand the steps they need to go through at whatever level they work at. Whether it's a Scrum Master working within a team, an RTE working across the art, or even someone like the SPC working across the whole organization, these 5 responsibility areas really form the 5 steps that we want them to follow to help implement flow in the domain that they're supporting. When we get to the last responsibility area, growing a flow mindset, of course, this one puts even more pressure on the leadership. I was away last week in South Africa doing a trip visiting customers. It was a great opportunity to hear from them directly, and a lot of them were raising the same problem. We've put in place the events, the activities, the artifacts, the roles that SAFe describes. What we're challenged with is really improving the systems of work. And of course, that comes down to leadership. That's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. How do we really improve the systems of work to improve flow? So I'm going to go through each of these new responsibility areas. Some, of course, aren't new, but they've come together as these 5 steps, brand new guidance that you'll see next week that we hope will support those playing this new role. And the first responsibility area, I'm sure, is fairly familiar to most people, but I want to share some templates and tools that I think will make this even more effective. Anytime we start to think about how we can improve flow, it needs to start with the first step, which is really visualizing and understanding what flow looks like. And our best lean tool here is still value stream mapping. We've had value stream mapping in SAFe for some time, not to be confused with value stream identification, where we think deeply about how to organize our arts, but rather the process we go through to map all the steps in a particular workflow. And organizations are typically doing this by looking at a set of features that they've delivered previously, going back and reflecting what were the steps that all those features went through, and then applying some rough metrics to each step. And I always say here, and you'll see some good examples on the next slide, try and get the right level of precision. It really doesn't matter whether one step took 2 days or 3 days or 5 hours or 7 hours. When you start to build out your value stream map, some steps will simply jump out as the biggest bottlenecks and delays. We tend to find that over precision here gives diminishing returns in terms of the amount of effort it takes from your part. But we want to map out the steps, whether these are steps across a team, an art, or the portfolio, and we want to add some very important metrics. We want to ask ourselves for that particular step, how much time was spent actively working on the work, what we call active time. How much time was spent waiting for the work to start, what we call wait time. And then, of course, percent complete and accurate. What percentage of the work that arrives at your station can you process because it's ready, it's complete, it meets your quality standards, versus what percent you have to send back to get fixed. And of course, anytime the work moves backwards in the process, it imparts huge delays on flow. It slows things down enormously. What I have here is a really nice example of what this looks like in practice. And one of the things that I noticed as I shared some of these ideas last week is that the discipline that this slide, this value stream mapping canvas brings, was really well received by organizations who have tried to apply value stream mapping, but perhaps have sometimes felt challenged. So this is what we call a current state value stream map canvas, and it has some important information on it Think about this as the output of a workshop where we have the required subject matter experts, people who really understand this workflow coming together to reflect on what it looks like. In the top left, knowing that we can apply this to any workflow, we have the key details around what value stream this is, whereabouts in the business it is, what triggers it, what value delivery looks like, and also some interesting data around what the feature request per month is to understand the delivery rate that we need to achieve. In the middle, we have our baseline metrics. I'm going to talk more about metrics later, but what is the total active time? What's the total wait time? What's the efficiency of this process? This one is 23%. Honestly, that's very efficient. A lot of organizations we're seeing are struggling with single digit or low double digit percentages when they start looking at the ratio of active time versus total time across these workflows. And then what's our flow velocity? How many features can we actually deliver per time period through this particular workflow? And once organizations start to map these workflows, they're recognizing a couple of things. The first thing they're recognizing is that the development activities are typically pretty well optimized. These are experts working in their field who really understand what it is to effectively develop new features, understand how to work with the systems and tools they've worked with for many years. They're often finding that the biggest delays and opportunities for improvement live in the continuous exploration step as we bring new ideas together, define them, get them ready, or perhaps in the release steps as we look to deliver this workflow to the market. So we need to make sure that our value stream maps are nice and broad to pick up on all these opportunities. And then you can see in the top right, the organization that's gone through these steps has highlighted the biggest cause of their delays. Some are due to waiting, some are due to problems with specialization, some are due to misunderstandings in terms of the work to be done. But the real magic comes when we think about the future state. And the message to any role that's looking to coach flow is that at any time you need to have a current state and a future state value stream map. So again, whether this is a Scrum Master working with a team, an RTE working across the Agile release train, at all times, these two canvases form the basis and foundation of what they're trying to do in terms of improving flow. And what's nice here on this future state version is you can see some target metrics. What do we want flow efficiency to look like? What would flow time be if we wanted to achieve some of our goals in terms of accelerating time to market? And there's a really important underlying message in these future state target metrics. If you think about SAFe Principle 1, take an economic view, at some point it will simply be not economical to keep chasing improvements in some of these areas. So we need to understand what good looks like. We also need to understand when it is good enough. And then on the right-hand side, you can see they've defined certain features that are going to help them to implement this future state. Not only does the future state include less steps, it might include brand new steps. They need to optimize the process at some point. It might improve reworking the steps, perhaps replacing some manual steps with automated steps. But these features will go into the next PI planning session. And like I said, this future state canvas forms the basis of everything that this flow coach is trying to do in terms of achieving and changing the system to improve flow. Now, these tools are all available today. Just very quickly to remind you this, you have access to SAFe Studio, the canvases that I've shown you, the workshops that you can use to run with your stakeholders. It's all there for you to download. And of course, the expectation is that you're running this on a continuous basis. Once you support the organization achieving the future state becomes the current state, and we need to rinse and repeat the process. But truly, I can't emphasize enough that going back to our lean roots, the value stream mapping is the foundation of any flow coach's work. Starting by understanding the workflow and where to improve it provides them the tools they need to go to the second step. And the second step is pretty familiar as well. We understand about Kanban systems, but many organizations struggle to understand where across the organization we need to apply Kanban systems and what it really looks like to apply them effectively. So this forms the second step that the flow coach needs to think about in terms of now visualizing flow. This will help them unlock further opportunities to improve flow as we get to the future steps. And I've just put a reminder on this slide because I found it useful myself. What is it that Kanban is trying to do at the heart? And a little definition here from the Kanban guide is worth just reflecting on. The Kanban method provides a strategy for optimizing the flow of value using a visual pull-based system instead of work being pushed to or by the team. The other thing I heard last week as I got the opportunity to speak to customers is they were simply struggling with the amount of demand versus the amount of capacity. Huge over demand in terms of requirements, new business cases, new opportunities, limited capacity in terms of those that could deliver it. And it was getting so extensive in some areas that this was becoming a huge stress point. Stressful by the teams who felt they were overloaded, stressful for those stakeholders who had the responsibility to deliver on these new opportunities. Kanban is there at its very heart to help us balance demand to capacity. Once we do that, we find that flow accelerates through all systems that are applying this. So the 3 practices we're going to help the organization adopt, of course, is defining and visualizing a workflow, managing the work through that workflow, and importantly then, helping to continually improve that workflow. And in SAFe, we have a very specific approach to Kanban systems. If you look very carefully at the updates we did to the big picture, there was one very small but important update at the team level, which is now on the big picture. We have a Kanban system across the backlog, even at the team level. It's becoming unarguable that teams are seeing huge benefits through visualizing the work in this approach. So now we have Kanban systems at every level of the framework. And what we're trying to create is a connected set of Kanban systems that really allow the organization to flow the work from strategy to execution. Keeping in mind, of course, that not all the work goes top down. A small proportion does, the epics that need to be governed effectively, but a lot of the work is coming in sideways. The Agile release train, picking up new features that they understand they need to deliver, the teams picking up new stories, what they need to do to continually support the health of the system. What we find, though, again and again, is that if the work gets to the team, and by that time the team is overloaded, there's too much work in process or too much to be done, we haven't controlled the demand on the system early enough. So these connected Kanban systems allow us to control demand at the earliest possible opportunity, which is across the portfolio. And that way we can really balance the capacity we have across our teams and arts to effectively work on the highest priorities. I only have one slide on this today because I think this is fairly familiar to a lot of you, but I will point you to the link at the bottom of the article, the bottom of the slide, sorry, where we've put together a brand new article with some of the key steps needed to successfully put these Kanban systems into place. And of course, it starts with mapping the workflow. We know this now. We've just completed our value stream map. We have the best understanding to date of what the workflow looks like in our particular domain. But the value stream map doesn't translate directly to Kanban states. We're going to arrange the steps in a way that makes sense. We might combine some of the steps from the value stream map. We might separate other ones out where we need more visibility. And then we're going to identify some buffer states, either where the work needs to be processed as a batch, or perhaps where we want some more visibility as to where there might be bottlenecks in the system. You can see here we have a buffer state showing all the work that is ready for testing before the testing begins. And that's a great way of identifying and helping the organization find areas where we might be over-constrained, we might not have enough people, perhaps we have not enough specialization. When we think about applying our WIP limits on Kanban systems, we always start from the right-hand side, start from the downstream activities and ask them what capacity do they have to process work, and then work back left through the system. And that way we often find, although we might have huge development capacity, we might have limited capacity in testing and validation, we constrain it by the limited capacity. That's how we make sure the system doesn't become overloaded. And then, of course, things like policies, we need to be very clear about who can do the work, what it looks like to complete the work, our definitions of done, things around shared ownership, what it means to apply our quality standards. And finally, any Kanban system needs classes of service. So making sure we have clear understanding of what it looks like when we need to expedite something through the teams, the arts, or even the portfolio, versus things that may be more traditional pieces of work or things that are attached to a particular delivery date. So I'm not going to say too much more about this, but this is absolutely the second step in any flow coach, and the work they need to do is to help the organization visualize and start to improve their workflows at every single level. Now, once they've completed those first two steps, they then really have the opportunity to start measuring flow. They've got a good understanding of the workflow. It's visualized now. It's starting to demonstrate and show where it's struggling. And of course, if we're building these Kanban systems into our ALM tools, we're starting now to get some metrics back and some real data that we can use to drive opportunities. Now, one of the other big things that was connected to flow that was really impactful for us at Scaled Agile was the flow metrics. We really felt that up until this point, organizations were struggling to really understand where the work was in the process. What was the true objective measure of how things are progressing? Often it felt like this was a subjective viewpoint using our traditional phase gate approaches, our RAG status, or whatever it might be. It really felt to us, and what we've seen through our customers, that the flow metrics turned what was once intangible into something that became tangible. The 6 flow metrics, they form part of our measure and grow approach. I won't have time to go into the overall measure and grow approach today, but I will just say that flow is only one of 3 dimensions we need to measure. We obviously need to measure competency. Are we getting better in the lean agile skills that we're supporting the organization adopting? And we need to measure outcomes. Are we delivering the, the value that our customers and stakeholders expect? But alongside that, we need to measure flow. Are we truly improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the systems we use to deliver the value to those customers? And there we see 6 flow metrics. The guidance, importantly, is not to apply these metrics at each level. We are not recommending that a team apply all 6 flow metrics. We're not recommending that an agile release train or portfolio apply all 6 metrics. Instead, we're going to apply the metrics, the flow metrics, where they help us to take better decisions. It could be that a portfolio applies 2 or 3 of these. An agile release train maybe applies 4 of them. Maybe a team applies 2. I'm going to show you some examples, but always select them where they help us to take better decision-making or generate better insights. So let me briefly go through the flow metrics, and I'll say a few things about how we're seeing these applied today. So the first one, of course, is flow distribution. And we're seeing that many organizations today are really struggling with the long-term sustainability of their solutions. As they develop new solutions and deliver new opportunities into the market, they're finding that the work to maintain the health of those systems and solutions is eating up an increased capacity compared to their ability to deliver new business features. One of the challenges they're also facing is that they don't have a good grasp on what that capacity looks like. So flow distribution very simply allows us, typically measured across an agile release train, to look at the balance of work of new business features versus perhaps the work going into maintenance to support the health of the system itself. And what we find is that organizations that focus too much on business features tend to find the health of their systems degrading over time. Similarly, those that focus too much on the health of the systems without delivering enough business features tend to end up with dissatisfied customers. So not only do we want them to measure flow distribution, we want them to set some intentional targets as to what they want this to look like in the future. We saw a really nice application of flow distribution in a portfolio recently. A portfolio decided to measure flow distribution across investment horizons. The question they wanted to answer is, do we have a balanced portfolio that's going to deliver value today and value into the future? So they looked at the distribution of H1 work, H2 work, H3 work, and that allowed them to adjust and target a particular target distribution quarter by quarter as they look to balance the portfolio and the work that it does. So flow distribution is critical to help identify the different types of work in the system. The second one, which we typically see measured at the team level, which I think is familiar to everyone on this call, is flow velocity, measuring the number of stories, in this case, that the team is delivering each iteration. I think it still has real value. New teams, of course, as they start to apply the outputs of their retrospectives, want to see flow velocity going up initially. But longer term, we really want to see flow velocity stabilizing. A great indicator that teams understand their capacity, they can commit to work and they can deliver their work predictably. This all rolls in the importance about predictability that I spoke at the beginning. One thing to keep in mind with all these flow metrics is we always measure them on the work item that appears at the level that we're measuring. So if we're using flow velocity within a team, we're measuring it against stories. If we're using things like flow distribution at the art level, we're measuring it against features. And we're really encouraging organizations to move away from this idea of rolling up work from the team to the art to the portfolio level. Once you have 10 or 20,000 user stories across a portfolio, the noise that's contained in that data makes it very ineffective to really steer effectively. And then perhaps one of the most important ones is flow time. This really describes very clearly what it looks like for someone waiting to receive the benefit and the value captured in that feature. How long does it take from when we start implementing a feature to when that feature is complete? And we know that in SAFe, we want all our features to fit within a PI. We can see on this histogram that some are outside of that time box. That may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing. It may be that we intentionally delayed them because it was the right thing to do. It could be that they were the most important features and we have a challenge on our hands that we need to resolve. One of the things I heard last week that some customers are doing nicely with this one is they're looking at the different types of features and how they fit into the flow time analysis. Is it always one type of feature that takes longest? Is it the features that cut across multiple teams that we really struggle with effectively delivering. So make sure, of course, that when you start to optimize the system, you're really focusing on those systemic improvements and not just focusing on the things that are easy to resolve. The other thing that you can do with this one that can work very effectively, typically measured across the Agile release train, is hone in on specific parts of flow time. Maybe you want to look at the development flow time. Maybe you want to look at the continuous exploration flow time. And that will allow you to measure more precisely and identify the areas where the real improvements can be delivered. And then, of course, coming back to what we said around work in process, if we really want to manage the amount of work in the system, it can help to visualize the amount of work getting into the system. And something like flow load is typically measured across the portfolio or the Agile release train. This example is from the Agile release train using a cumulative flow diagram. So at any point in time, showing the quantity of work in each state in the ARC Kanban system. And what I always say here is if your arrival curve, the speed at which work is moving into the implementing state, is at a steeper gradient than your departure curve, which describes the work moving to done, it means that more work is moving into the system than leaving the system. And this is the #1 leading indicator for longer flow times in the future. So as flow coaches, we need to monitor these flow load diagrams to help understand where it looks like we may have problems coming down further down the road and mitigate those by managing and putting in place our WIP limits, or perhaps adjusting the ones we have. Now, the flow efficiency we've already seen, so I won't say too much about this. This is the one that we're typically seeing doesn't come for free out of the ALM tools you might be using. Some ALM tools are starting to put this in place, asking the person doing the work to either mark the work as in progress or waiting. But typically, this is the one that comes out of a value stream mapping workshop that we saw earlier. This is the one that helps organizations recognize that efforts they make to improve the total active time really are diminished completely when we look at it compared to the total wait time. Up until this point, many organizations have focused all their improvement efforts on helping people to work faster. When they start putting this in place, they start realizing that the work they need to do is to move the delays out of the system. That's where the optimization benefits really come. And then finally, to close the loop, we talked about predictability as being something critical to organizations looking to implement SAFe. The ARC predictability measure is probably familiar to all of you. It's one of the metrics that SAFe really mandates. This is where we measure whether the ARC has successfully delivered the objectives they committed to. Have they achieved the planned business value against the commitment they made in PI planning? Don't forget, if we want to measure predictability across things like the portfolio, there's other ways to do it. We may measure whether we've made and met our key milestones or key deliverables. But across the ARC, certainly the ARC predictability metric is the #1 approach. A couple of important things I want to say to summarize that. I'm sure many of you have seen those flow metrics, hopefully, as you've gone through the new materials associated with SAFe 6.0. We need to be really careful we don't chase these flow metrics at the expense of everything else. And this is something that I've seen some organizations do, which can lead them to further challenges down the road. One of the things we talk about in the metrics workshop that I'm going to be doing next Friday at the summit is complementary metrics. As we improve flow time, what are the things that if they moved in the opposite direction would be unacceptable to the business? So a complementary metric for flow time might be something like customer net promoter score. We can improve flow time by delivering less value. We can improve flow time by delivering less quality. But if we start to impact customer net promoter score at the expense of flow time, then we won't have achieved our goals. So we always need to think about what is the complementary metric as we start to define some of our future state targets. And then finally, of course, and I don't think I need to say too much on this, just be careful anytime we start applying metrics. The job here is not to use these to manage by the numbers. And behind any metric or change in a metric, there's often a story that needs understanding and working with the teams to really see what the true situation is. So if you see a drop off in things like productivity, that could be due to a team onboarding a new technology, perhaps sickness, perhaps new team members, a whole raft of different things. We need to take the time to really work with the teams to understand what's behind the numbers. Okay, let me say a few things about the penultimate section, accelerating flow. Now, accelerating flow, again, was a huge part of SAFe 6.0. The storyline that we're trying to put in place here is that once you understand the properties of flow, those 8 properties that I showed you at the beginning that apply to any flow-based system, once you understand how to measure flow, then the next step is to accelerate flow. And those 3 things create this closed loop system. Any flow coach now can recognize and describe flow to their stakeholders, to their team members. They can use the flow metrics to understand where impediments to flow exist. And then, of course, they can apply the flow accelerators to adjust each one of those properties in a positive manner. I don't have time today to go through all of these. I'd encourage you to have a look at them. Some of them we have touched on as we've talked about other slides, things like visualizing and limiting WIP. Other things that you'll recognize from existing SAFe material, things like working in smaller batches. But I chose 3 that I just wanted to highlight, which I think are new to SAFe and are worth saying a few things about. SAFe has never spoken about bottlenecks before, and that's the second accelerator. Bottlenecks appear in any flow-based system, and there's usually a largest bottleneck that we need to address. We often see bottlenecks appearing as work piling up behind a state in the Kanban system, but sometimes bottlenecks, particularly those built out of specializations, lack of particular skills, we need to use things like retrospectives to really surface those. What we're understanding and seeing that organizations are struggling with here is the biggest bottleneck is often something beyond the team or art's control. And the expectation with SAFe, through their eyes, is that the teams and arts can really address any of the impediments they see. And that's simply not the case. Left them to themselves, the teams and the arts can only affect a small number of the systemic impediments that they're experiencing. So the bottlenecks is truly where we need to bring the leadership on board to help us change the system. Again, be very careful of just addressing the low-hanging fruit. These are the things that will really move the needle in a positive direction. The second one I wanted to share, which I think is so pertinent after the years that we've been through, is optimize time and zone. And the reflection here is that if myself and Em perhaps were doing the same piece of work, maybe one of us was doing it in an office environment, maybe another one was doing it remotely, I would suggest we'd see 2 very different levels of output and productivity. I won't suggest which one would be higher, but the scenario and the environment in which you work has such an impact on the type of work and the levels of productivity. So when we talk about optimizing time and zone, it's not about saying we don't want any meetings. It's saying that we want to create real good collaborative opportunities for our knowledge workers. We want to make sure they're not task switching too much. We want to make sure there's a good balance in terms of time they have to really focus on the work at hand versus collaborate with other teammates. And it may be that since COVID, we've almost gone in the other direction. Meetings were required to ensure that we actually work together since we were distributed. I think all of us are struggling now with trying to find time during our busy weeks to really find how we can be productive with the work we need to do that delivers value. So organizations need to attend to this now more than ever. And the last one I wanted to mention, which we see a lot in the field, is number 8, remediate legacy policies and practices. Some organizations are struggling when they bring SAFe in to really at the same time mitigate and remove the ways they used to work. We have a lot of respect for the previous ways of working. They got us to where we are today. They help the business be successful. But many of these things, and you see some examples on the slide here, are simply counterproductive or actually contradictory to the new ways we want to work. It also finds that organizations then struggle in thinking that SAFe is bringing an extra layer of activities and events, where actually SAFe is there to replace many of the ways that you work today. So if you have a system demo in place, that needs to replace your current methods of measuring. If you're now having an objective way to really evaluate system progress, that needs to replace some of the more subjective methods that you were using to report on the progress of the development activities. So we're asking organizations to really look very carefully at where their more traditional ways of working are counterproductive and where they need to remove those to help them focus on the new lean agile ways of working. Now, all these accelerators have real context. And in the new and latest update to 6.0, there are articles that describe how to apply these accelerators at each level. So if a Scrum Master is applying the coaching flow responsibility wheel, they're going to use the team flow article to help them understand how to apply these in their domain. If an SPC is working across the whole portfolio, they can use the portfolio flow article. And although I don't have time today to go into detail on this slide, I put it here as reference because, of course, I'm happy to share the PDF. There's this deep, deep connection between flow metrics and flow accelerators. And I put together a simple table here to try and illustrate that. I'll just describe the first row and leave the rest for you to look at in your own time. Something like flow distribution, we talked about that. It helps us understand the balance of work in the system. Too much in one direction, the system is really going to struggle. That's the problem that we're going to surface. There are flow accelerators that can directly be applied to help address that problem we might be seeing. Maybe we're not getting the fast enough feedback. Maybe we don't understand how to balance business and technical requirements because we're not validating the technical feedback on the system or the feedback from our customers. Maybe we need to manage queue lengths. If we make sure we don't overcommit to work, it allows us to change the distribution of that work more easily. So every one of these flow accelerators applies directly to the problems that you're going to surface through the flow metrics. But let me finish out with the last step in the process, which is about growing a flow mindset. And I only have a single slide on this. Any flow coach, whether they're applying everything we looked at today at any level in the organization, needs to help the organization really think about what it means to grow a flow mindset. And it's worth just pausing and thinking about this a little bit deeply. Everything we do in SAFe, whether it's the roles we put in place, the new events, the new activities, it really has one purpose. And the purpose is to put a systems lens on the way the organization works. We want to lower that water level, let those big boulders and rocks start showing through, so the organization can truly see for the first time where it needs to apply itself to improve its ability to deliver value to its customer. And even over the last 5 or 6 years, as I've been working at Scaled Agile, the demands on organizations to accelerate value flow are always increasing at an ever increasing rate. So the pressures here to be able to deliver value are extreme. The pressures coming from internal stakeholders, the pressures coming from external stakeholders as these organizations look to compete. So we need these flow coaches to help the organization get trained in these concepts. Everyone needs to understand what it looks like and what it means to do value stream mapping. Everyone needs to understand what it means to visualize workflows. We need them to help make the work transparent. We need to see the flow of work at every single level, remembering that the facts are friendly. If we can't see the issues, we can't manage them. The number one response when we help organizations put these Kanban systems into place is, number one, that felt really good. Number two, oh my God, look at how much work we have to do. So it's a critical step. And then, of course, we need our leadership and our teams across the entire business to take ownership of what it means to improve flow. I always say that the Agile release train has 2 critical missions. The first mission is to build the solution it's tasked with developing. That's the mission that most organizations focus on. But the second mission is the mission to improve the way that it delivers that work. And that's the one that we're talking about today. And then finally, of course, we need to use the flow metrics to help us understand where to apply these improvement opportunities. And we need to be careful not to apply them in the most obvious places. Sometimes the most obvious places are the easiest places. The true systemic improvements are the ones that really change the way the organization works. Those are the ones that will truly unlock the greatest opportunity to accelerate the flow of value. So I know there was a lot there, but I'd like you guys to have everything, to see all the new stuff. And with that, Em, happy to take any questions on anything that I've covered.
Thanks, Andy. That was awesome. I know I appreciated the full view, and I'm guessing others did as well. We did get a few questions as we were heading through the session. One here from Andrew. What are your thoughts on using average cycle time equals average width divided by average throughput, i.e. Little's Law, as a flow metric?
We talk about Little's Law. I'm just going to move us to this slide, Em, so we can have this up while we're, so apologies for the running through the slides. So we talk about Little's Law a lot, and we talk about it when we talk about queue sizes. We do find Little's Law very useful. The challenge that was mentioned there, of course, is that when we think about any queue, we're thinking about average wait times. The average wait time will be the length of the queue divided by the processing rate. That was the point that was being made. Let me say one thing about that. We find it particularly useful for one reason, I think. When organizations see Little's Law and they realize the average time a customer is going to have to wait for a new feature is relying on those 2 things, the amount of work in the system versus how quickly they're processing it, they suddenly have a light bulb moment. They realize that they can affect that wait time in 2 ways. They can affect it by either working faster and improving the processing rate, or they can affect it by reducing the queue length. And that is very analogous to the value stream map that we saw, where we talked about active time versus wait time. And up to this point, a lot of organizations have put almost all of their transformational efforts focused on improving the processing time. How can we get people working more effectively? How can we support them working faster? Little's Law is another means and another tool that helps them realize that if they simply control the amount of work that gets into the system, when they get that request for a new feature and they drop it into the Kanban system, it's going to go through much faster because there isn't a big queue of work. So I find Little's Law is very useful for that purpose. When it comes to actually measuring things like throughput, cycle time we don't tend to talk about in SAFe, just simply because cycle time has so many accepted definitions within the industry, it's become a little bit difficult to work with. When we measure things like flow time, we tend to do it directly out of the ALM tools rather than derive it through the means you described. But it doesn't mean that Little's Law isn't any less effective in helping organizations understand the impact of queues on the wait times of their customers.
Thank you, Andy. I've got one here from Lavanya, I think it is. Kanban is a list of work items or issues. How do you integrate that with flow mindset and prioritize it accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just try and move to the right slide as we talk. Here's the thing. I think the Kanban approach, the Kanban systems. I mean, let's be clear. So when the teams adopt an agile methodology, it may be Scrum, it may be Kanban. Regardless of that, the visualization of work is seen to be effective in all scenarios. Hence why we talk about Kanban systems specifically here. But I think there's a couple of things that happen when we put these in place. We can't manage the work that we can't see. And the work we do as knowledge workers is a lot of the time invisible. It's not like we have, components of a manufacturing system piling up in the corner of the warehouse. This knowledge work, unless we make it visual, is simply invisible. We can have as many initiatives or stories in flight. Technically, there's no limit on it. There's no holding cost in terms of actual warehouse space. So the first thing is just simply visualize the work. Organizations are truly struggling to manage over demand coming from all areas of the business. So the first step, visualizing the work, we find is a great aha moment in terms of them now then taking the second step, which is actually to manage that work. And that second step is the important piece, I think, Em. So although, of course, the team working with this Kanban system day to day is finding it useful because they can see the work they need to do today and how it progresses to their next teammate, what it really allows is that flow coach, someone like the Scrum Master team coach or maybe the RTE, to start to see where the system itself is under pressure. And the feedback I got last week on my customer visits was they've invested hugely in the development capacity. And they felt good about it because everyone's busy doing work. But what they're seeing once they put the Kanban system in place is it's the wrong type of work to be doing, because that downstream step, the validation and testing, they have less capacity. And these developers are keeping busy working on other tasks and other stories just to make sure they have something to do. But it's not the tasks and stories that the developers and testers are moving through the system, because they're still way, way behind in terms of the queue they have. So thinking about what is the downstream step and what is the constraint on that step, and use that to constrain the upstream step. The WIP limit on the development column is constrained by the number of testers in the column that follows. And organizations are finding that they simply haven't built the right capacity profile to do the kind of work they need to do. And that's scary to them. They're having to really readjust and think about how they solve that problem. They never even knew they had the problem until the Kanban system was in place. So we see a lot of knock-on effects with, once these are in place, what it unlocks in terms of the organization thinking more carefully about flow.
Thanks, Andy. I tend to agree. Visualization is the key. We have lots of Andrews asking questions. It's very odd. Is that how it works, Andy? Yeah, Andrew's like talking to Andrews. I don't know. Anyway, different Andrew this time. How do you track value velocity, not throughput?
Yeah, so this is another great question. That is funny. We have a lot of Andrews. I haven't set that up, I promise. So let me bring up this slide. So a couple of things to answer. So we're talking about flow today. Flow is about the flow of work. We hope the work is valuable. We hope that our features contain valuable new functionality. We hope the work we're doing on our PI objectives describe value. But the answer to this is really couched in the 3 dimensions that describe how we measure progress across an organization. So we're talking about flow today, but we can't talk about flow in isolation from outcomes. And outcomes is how we ensure that the work we're doing is valuable. What I will say, though, is that we often get the question, I'm sure you have it, Em, as well, how does SAFe define value? Well, how organizations define value depends on what's valuable for that organization. And I don't say that in any flippant manner. I say it completely seriously. In SAFe, we have a role, the business owner role, who have the responsibility to have the knowledge, the insight, the understanding of the business, to be the ones who can truly say what is valuable for that business. They're the ones who assign the business value to our PI objectives. If over time we see that the things they think are valuable are not proving to be valuable in the market, then we need to course correct or think about our group of business owners more holistically. But truly, value is what the business values. And there are people in the business who understand that value and can talk to it. But to come back to the point made, flow is only one part of how we really measure the progress an organization is making to business agility. And I completely agree, detached from a good understanding of value and how we measure outcomes, we might end up chasing our ability to accelerate the throughput of stuff without ensuring that that is valuable stuff. So although not a topic for today, that's well covered in the outcome domain of this measure and grow model. And it's a great question.
Thanks, Andy. In the chat, I'm now being advised that Andrews are a very exclusive club. How's that? So I'm gonna just diss the Andrews for a moment, move over to a Tom just for a little variety in our lives. Could you please talk a little around coaching flow in the context of the operational value stream?
Yeah, this is another great question. Been thinking a lot about this recently. So I truly think, and maybe this is what the question is kind of getting at, there's something generally applicable about what we're looking here. I really think there is. And you know, at Scaled Agile and for you as partners and all SAFe enterprises, for many years now, we've been thinking about what does it truly look like to bring, for want of a better phrase, business and IT closer together, whether that's business teams on an art or truly bringing SAFe into the business in terms of applying some lean agile ways of working across perhaps a functional, a marketing department or a legal department, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of domain specificity there. You know, the way marketeers work is very different to sales teams, to legal. So organizations see mixed successes, I would say. But when I look at this, I think this is generally applicable. I mean, if you think about lean and the roots of lean, you know, it comes from manufacturing. Manufacturing is an operational process. I think this is a great way to really help those outside of the development value streams to think about how they can improve their ways of working. Anyone can map their workflow. Anyone can benefit from visualizing their workflow. The flow metrics pretty much apply across the board to operational work as well. The flow accelerators certainly do. And the flow mindset, of course, is something across the whole organization. So I think this is strongly applicable. And I would maybe add one more thing. You know, if there are two things you could do to really bring lean and agile to the operational side of the business or to the business in general, it would be this, an understanding of flow and how to improve and measure it. And the second thing, I think it's something like OKRs, very simple, iterative approach to getting them used to setting goals with associated measures, to achieving those goals in some kind of time box, to reflecting, and then to going again. This idea of just iterating, perhaps not against stories, but against some kind of objective. And I think those two things really are very applicable to all the work we do, not just that in development. So I couldn't agree more with the question.
Thanks, Andrew. Andrew, I called you Andrew. Oh my goodness, see, all the Andrews are going in my head and I've stopped calling you Andy. Have you got a hard stop, Andy?
No, I can keep going as long as you guys need me.
Okay, got a few more in here. So if people do have a hard stop, we will not be offended if you drop off, but I'll try and close out the questions while we have Andy's attention. Question coming from Jeff in Texas. Training in flow. Will we see additional future SPC toolkits or new IP to help coach flow?
Yeah, another good question. So the answer is yes. I can't be too specific today about what format, not because I'm trying to hide anything, but because Tamara is the one who supports our curriculum development, and that's the research she's doing now. Is it e-learnings? Is it toolkits? Whatever it might be. But yes, absolutely, there will be things around flow. There'll be things around flow metrics. So stay tuned for that. We're working on it. And you've seen and others. I mean, I know you teach the RTE course fairly often, Em. You know, as we've gone through the 6.0 updates, the RTE one, I was supporting the team that was working on that, and I think we managed to get a good deal of flow into that, the flow metrics, Kanban systems, and so you'll see it now implementing SAFe, lesson 13, huge amount of flow in the flow accelerators. Those are in that course as well. So it's embedded across the courses, but yes, you will, Jeff, see some dedicated activities and resources in the future.
Thanks, Andy. What am I back to? This is a new Andrew. I have so many Andrews. It's so bizarre. I think this is a new Andrew. I'm trying to whip limit my hand.
Are you sure people aren't just changing their name as kind of
I don't. Actually, what's really sad is I actually know most of them, so I know they're real people. So there's someone toying with me. All right, so what are some good strategies as an SPC to help shift more of the client's energy from the first mission of the build to the second, improve? Improvement activities seem to keep getting deprioritized.
So honestly, we need to connect the two. So value stream mapping is a great way to highlight and illustrate what the work looks like today. Let's put up this current state map. But you won't get anywhere in any of this unless the stakeholders who can really change the system agree the system needs to be changed. So building urgency is the critical first step. And what I find that some organizations can do and some SPCs do very effectively is start to translate some of these flow metrics into dollar values. And of course, it's not meant to be precise. But if we see that we have 4 months of delay time built into our systems for some critical new features, reflect what it would have looked like to deliver that previous release 4 months early. Reflect what the market opportunity would have presented. Reflect how we would have increased our revenue across that period. And you need to make sure you're speaking the language of those that are going to help you improve the system. So truly turning flow time and flow efficiency into something that looks like a cost of delay with some real financial metrics is a great way to get the stakeholders to actually look at this and say, there's a problem here. There's a problem not just in terms of things aren't as good as they could be. There's a problem here in terms of we are losing opportunities for the business and potential revenue that we could be making. I think sometimes people put up with the way work works because it's always the way things have worked around here. And I'm sure you've heard that before. So I would think about seeing whether you can take a value stream map, put some basic financials to help describe that cost of delay in a manner that the stakeholders you need really care about. And I promise you that'll get their attention.
Nice. Thanks, Andy. I think you've already said you'll share the slides, and I'll just put a link in there for folks where they can get them. But Todd, I feel like Todd should just change his name to Andrew. That would make far more sense, wouldn't it? Every system will have a bottleneck. What guidance is available for optimizing where the bottleneck is best positioned?
So this question, I'm smiling because this describes a long debate we've had, and I'll give you a bit of an insight into the debate, as well as doing my best to answer the question. So we all know that theory of constraints describes that there's always the biggest bottleneck in the system, and any improvements applied anywhere but on that bottleneck are potentially wasted. There's a big debate happening at the moment that whether that manufacturing analogy applies to the multi-threaded work that we do. So if I think about something we do at Scaled Agile, like developing a new course, okay, there may be a biggest bottleneck, but while that bottleneck is exhibiting its effects, there are multiple threads that I need to keep and others need to keep actively working on. So without getting kind of too into this, yes, there's a biggest bottleneck, but there may be a collection of bottlenecks in the kind of work we do, which I think is different to how it used to be in manufacturing, where a single bottleneck simply stops the manufacturing line. So we perhaps need to address a range of different bottlenecks. And that's just kind of one thought. I think the world is a bit different today. But how do we address them? So this is the other thing I think we need to be challenged with. I alluded to the fact that many organizations assume that the teams and arts can address all these problems. That's simply not the case. But similarly, some bottlenecks are so significant that we need to think about whether there's something we can do in the meantime while we're waiting for it to be addressed. If one bottleneck perhaps is exhibiting itself as the way we work with our suppliers and we need to change the contractual terms, that may take 6 months, a year to actually resolve. And so I always find the most effective way to tackle bottlenecks is to tackle them on two fronts. What is the long-term resolution needed to resolve this bottleneck fully? Maybe it's hiring new people, maybe it's new training, maybe it's bringing in a brand new team, something significant. But then what is the steps we can take today to bypass the bottleneck in the meantime? And that might be sequencing the work effectively. It might be putting some capacity constraints on the teams that are the bottleneck. It might be looking to build up some short-term T-shaped skills. It might be looking to distribute the work across other teams. There's lots of strategies that are described in those 4 flow-based articles that I showed. One nice illustration of this, although it's not really a bottleneck, but I find it quite a nice story to share, only take me 1 second, is Reinert in one of his blog posts talks about the curse of root cause analysis and only focusing on a root cause. And he says that if I came into my office and the computer was on fire, if the root cause is that the wiring in the building is substandard, yes, that's the thing we need to address over the next year, but I'm damn well going to throw a towel over the computer to put it out as well. So trying to get the balance between the long-term fix of the bottleneck and what you can do today to bypass it, I think is the critical strategy here.
Thanks, Andy. I think I've got 2 left. These are repeated, these are the same Andrews again. These are not new Andrews. So from the original Andrew, I don't know if you where you're at these days with Rally, but the question was, do you know if there are any articles around setting up flow metrics in Rally? Because, you know, you mentioned you worked at Rally, so now you're going to solve a lot of the problems.
I feel like we're going to get to a time when we start arguing who was the original Andrew. No, this is another great question, right? Because I don't know the specifics, but I actually did see a Rally specific webinar on this the other day. So look out for that. I just saw it on LinkedIn. But we are seeing, in all seriousness for a moment, the platform partners who are people like Rally, the target processes, the Jira lines, really latching onto the flow metrics. I did a webinar with a platform partner a few weeks ago, Solidify. They had a wonderful dashboard, all 6 flow metrics on the screen. So I have seen stuff around Rally. Just look for it on LinkedIn, you'll find it. The one that I'm finding the ALM tools don't necessarily give you out the box, like I said, is the flow efficiency. I've seen some steps that some have taken. I know that Rally, for example, just from my history there, could do the other flow metrics, but I know the flow efficiency one, because it requires you to measure active and wait times. Some tools are starting to implement that, where you, as you start working on the morning of a day, you mark work as active and then you mark it as inactive when you stop working on it. Some are doing that, but that's the one flow metric, M, that doesn't necessarily come out of the ALM tools. The other 5, including flow predictability, which I'm seeing in a lot of tools now, seem to be the ones that are there out of the box. The top 4, distribution, velocity, time, and load, I'm confident in saying that all ALM tools will do those 4. A lot are doing flow predictability as well now. But yes, there was a webinar I saw on the Rally flow metrics. Search for Broadcom, because that's the company now, and they did do one recently, so it'd be great to have a look at that.
Thanks, Andrew. I think everything else in the chat is commentary as opposed to questions. But if I've missed your question, folks, now would be a great time to either repost it or speak up. All right, they were all quiet for at least a few seconds. Andy, thank you so much for the extra 10 minutes in there and hanging out with us again in your early morning. I'm sure we'll be knocking on your door again soon to get you to come visit us, because it is always fun and we always get a great audience when you're able to come and spend some time with us. So thank you very much on behalf of the Aussies and all the other folks from around the world who decided to chime in. And I know I'll be seeing you in Nashville next week. Yeah, thanks, Em. Thanks, everyone. See you next week, and look out for the new Coaching Flow article. You can tell this is something we're really excited about. It's going to continue to be an area of focus for us. And I think it is the key to helping organizations unlocking the benefits of SAFe and any lean agile approach. So really appreciate your time today and your questions. And thanks, Em, as always, for organizing this. Thanks, folks. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again soon.